So this webinar will be recorded and we will send out the recording to everyone who's registered from the event. So you'll be able to have this information and we'll also send the slides. But I'm just going to introduce myself and a little bit about extension, and then we'll get into Karim's presentation. So this is just a map of Colorado and our regions and our extensions offices. So hopefully you all are aware of CSU Extension, but we are the branch of the university that provides research to the public and creates events and programs and resources to address the needs of the community. And we heard a need from our vegetable community that drought is really bad this year, and we're all a little bit worried. And when we have dry times and when we have very wet times, the bugs get a little weird, and we have a different amount of bugs, different bugs like the dry, different bugs like the wet weather. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about today of how you can prepare your vegetable farm for bugs this year. And I'm with the Larimer County Extension Office. Karim is with the Denver County Extension Office. But this map shows extension offices across Colorado. So you can reach out to your local extension office to get support on issues. A little more information. If you want to know more about Larimer County Extension or CSU Extension, you can follow us on socials. You can register for our newsletter. I have our links here. You can just Google search us. An event that's coming up pretty soon is on April 21st. We're going to have Win in Drought, Smart Irrigation and Soil Management Workshop. So we're going to have a drought workshop, which is very timely right now as we are heading into a very dry season. Hopefully not. I have to knock on wood every time I say that because I don't want that to be fully true. But that's what we're expecting. So anyways, I'm going to give it off to Karim one moment while I bring up his intro. So Karim Gharbi has nearly a decade of experience in horticulture, conservation, and entomology with a strong background in both research and public engagement. He has worked for a garden center, a state park, and a landscaping company, and has spent close to 10 years with the Smithsonian Natural Museum of Natural History. There, he contributed to taxonomic research with the USDA ARS and served as an animal husbandry technician in the insect zoo and butter pavilion, where he combined scientific expertise with daily outreach to thousands of visitors. Karim earned his bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Virginia Tech and a master's degree in entomology from the University of Hawaii, where he investigated environmentally friendly insecticides for the control of western flower thrips. Karim now serves as a Denver County CSU Extension horticulture specialist, where he has presented at multiple events educating landowners and producers on insect control. So with that, I would love Karim to present.
All right, thank you, Jess. I'm just gonna share my screen. Oh, some random bugs. Ignore those. All right, here we go. Next slide. All right, so thank you all for joining me here today. I love talking about bugs, so this is really like a it's a mutualism. You like to hear about bugs, I want to talk about them. And I'm going to specifically talk about some of the insects that you're going to be encountering, insects and other pest pressures and problems that you're going to be dealing with in the early season. I will touch on things that are going to be affected by our really dry winter. It's not the focus of today. I mean, it definitely plays into it, but feel free to ask questions afterwards about how the drought will affect this year's pest pressure. Before I get into the meat of today, I just got to state that CSU is an equal opportunity and access and non-discrimination university. So when we provide programming or when we're selecting partners to do programming, we do not discriminate on the basis of like race, ethnicity, gender, English proficiency. Yeah, everyone is equal in our eyes. And we're also going to be using something called Mentimeter today. So this is like a survey tool to help make this talk a bit more engaging. So if you could go to menti.com and enter this code, or simply scan the QR code on your screen. And I have some questions for you all that I wanted to, just kind of boost engagement. Um, and I already have Mentimeter pulled up. So once you guys scan that, the first question is going to be, how have you learned what you already know about pest management? And I'll just kind of read off. The options are simple Google searches, Googling with like site:/edu. That's a tool to help filter out filter in just the extension sources. Um, Extension offices, other growers, print resources, and ancient esoteric wisdom. So let's see. I wish I should have shared my Mentimeter on this one, but so far I've got two for simple Google searches, two for other growers. That's about it right now. No one's using Googling with site.ed:/.edu. Hmm. I'll give you guys maybe like one more minute to answer those. Let's see, more from other growers. You know what? I should share this on my screen, but I'll do that in a minute. Let's see, you got 8 responses.
Do you want
And
me?
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, I will do that actually. I should have
Okay.
had that ready beforehand.
That's
Sorry about that.
okay.
Tmeter.com. Let's see. Things are still trickling in, but by far the biggest answer is simple Google searches. So I am going to really preach that when you're making Google searches, and I can actually show you right here. Let's say I search grasshoppers. If you type in this phrase, site:/edu, this will ensure that I only get websites that end in edu. So I will only get, first off comes CSU, which is great, our employer, and then other extension departments, Utah State Extension, University of California Extension, CSU again, Montana Extension. And so, again, I recommend using this tool because it gives you this research back information. And if you can't find a fact sheet specifically from CSU, it's best to go with the fact sheets from like the neighboring states. So now you can all see what everyone was answering. Yeah, so mostly Google searches, but it's one person for the ancient esoteric wisdom. Love it. All right. I think I have another question for you all now. So yeah, what is your biggest pest? Um, yeah, and so just feel free to type it in answer, and we'll kind of see how much what you guys are encountering lines up with what is occurring here. I mean, what we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about grasshoppers for sure and squash bugs. Japanese beetle, not so much because this is an early season webinar. Japanese beetle become more of a problem like in the mid to late summer. Earwigs, yep, we'll talk about those. Aphids, not so much, but they are big pests. Let's see. Fun fact about aphids: aphids are born pregnant, and the baby inside that aphid is also pregnant. That's why they reproduce so fast. Cool. All right, and I have one more question for y'all before we get started. What are some things that you're already doing to manage some of these pests? Whether you can say, specific control measures or just like physical controls, cultural controls, probably not so many chemical controls because you all are organic growers, but we'll talk about some of the organic pesticide options available to you. Mm, oh, yeah, sorry. Now it should be available. Insect netting, cool. Yep, physical. Yeah, insect netting is a big one. We'll talk about for like flea beetles. Um, yeah, I'm glad someone mentioned pollinators. When we talk about pest management, we often call it IPM, integrated pest management, but we should be really calling it IPPM, integrated pest and pollinator management, because encouraging pollinators is a big part of managing some of these pests. Not maybe not pollinators, but like encouraging a lot of the insects that visit flowers. Some of them are pollinators, some of them are predators. Biologics, yep. I have some choice words about ladybugs, but I'll save that for the end of this talk.
I think, Kareem, there's a way with Mentimeter that you can present that slide. Yep. If you click start presentation right in that blue. There we go.
Oh, my
Now it's
bad.
a little better. No worries.
I'll remember that for the end when we come back to Mentimeter. Let's see. I'll give you guys like maybe 10 more seconds. Beneficials. Yep. Yeah. Well, I can talk about like at length about the parasitic wasps. They are my favorite insects because they cultivate a virus in their ovaries that they inject into their host along with their eggs. And this virus like does not attack their babies. It's like co-evolved with them for so long. Companion planting does help. Yep. Bird netting. I forget that birds can actually be pests in the garden. Cool. All right, so I'm glad that some of these things you guys have, we're going to cover some of what you mentioned, but I think some of these measures will be new to you, and I'll kind of gauge how much of it was new to you at the end of our talk. So before we get into the meat of today, I want to talk about just some technical things about pest management. First off, this is the pyramid of IPM. You probably are all familiar with this. It describes how we have all these different pest control strategies and how they vary along this gradient of like risk and labor, where the things towards the bottom are more preventative, less risk and labor intensive, and things towards the top are more reactive and more risk and labor intensive. So whenever we can, we should try to use the methods towards the bottom of the pyramid. And as I go through each pest that I mentioned, like the pest control methods, I will always start with the preventative strategies and then work my way up to the reactive chemical control strategies. And so we talk about this term integrated pest management. What does the integrated part of that mean? It means that we're often going to be using multiple pest control methods. And we want to have these methods to have like reinforcing synergistic effects. So one example is when you're using biologics, what we call biological controls, like this aphid mummy wasp that injects its eggs into little aphids. Um, if you're spraying chemicals, even if they are organic, you maybe want to put a pause on that while you're releasing your biologics, because these organisms are also vulnerable to those same pesticides. So, putting a pause in your spraying as an example while you're releasing biologics is an example of integrated pest management. Another example is like, let's say that I have a lot of weeds on a large scale and I have plants in between them. Let me play this video again. Maybe I'll spray vinegar to kill the bulk of the weeds, but once I get to my plantings that are maybe more sensitive, I'll switch to hand pulling to avoid, those two methods coming into conflict with each other. So there's many examples. Those are just the two like most simple. And these aphids will die within like 3 to 4 days, by the way. And I also want to talk a bit about thresholds. And this is the last kind of dry, mathy thing before we get into the fun bug ID and management stuff. Um, so when you see it, you don't have to manage, you don't have to spend time and energy managing when you see a single insect. There are specific levels of these insects that basically warrant control. So the economic threshold is this line down here, this the dotted line, that is the lowest pest population density that is going to cause you some kind of economic loss. This is when you treat, because if you treat at this level, the cost of treatment is cheaper than letting the pest do its thing. You get an immediate return on investment when you treat at this level, at the economic threshold. Now, if you ignore that pest and it climbs, the population climbs to the economic injury level, at that point, the cost of treatment is going to be it's going to be it's already it is it basically you've defeated the purpose. At that point, the pest population has grown to a level that your treatment is not going to provide a return on investment. It's actually going to be cheaper to just let things be. And so we really want to treat here at the economic threshold before we get to what I call the point of no return. These thresholds, you're probably asking, okay, like what are the thresholds then? They are very specific to the pest and the crop that you're dealing with. So you can simply just look up what is the threshold for, cabbage whites on collard greens versus cabbage whites on broccoli. It's going to vary not just between like different crop families, but like different crops within the same family. And so I'll provide you with, actually, I'll have a table in a minute to show you like some of these specific thresholds, specifically on crucifers. But again, the rest of these thresholds are really easy to find online. Now, I also want to talk about why we should be aiming to suppress populations, not eradicate them. Eradication is usually, like 90% of the time, impossible. The few times that it is possible, that's why I have this picture here of the murder hornet. We were able to eradicate this insect from the United States that invaded Washington State in 2018 for two reasons. One, there was very few of them. There was only two nests that invaded, and also they are social insects. What we did was we actually caught one of the wasps and tied a string around it and then let it fly back to its nest, and then we followed it with a drone so we could see where it was going. But because it was social, it was easy to track its population. Things that are solitary, like Japanese beetle, emerald ash borer, Asian jumping worms, these are all three invasives in Colorado. It's going to be impossible to eradicate them. They are simply too prevalent and they're too mobile, being they're able to move around. Um, so that's why we should be aiming to suppress those populations below economic thresholds. Attempts to eradicate insects, while well-intentioned, often have really negative side effects. For example, that's what this picture is showing you here. Um, the image on the left is showing you before spraying, and you have these long, dark insects are your beneficials. They're lacewing larvae, and then you have your pests. These lighter colored insects, and then you have your secondary pests, these little darker outlined insects. These secondary pests, yes, they are plant feeding, they are doing damage, but they're often doing very negligible damage until you spray. When you spray, you kill off first a lot of your primary pests, but you also kill off your beneficials, which are often much more sensitive to these chemicals than the pest insects. The pest insects often have like innate resistance just from being exposed before, and also because they have to evolve mechanisms to detoxify the plant's defense compounds, and those mechanisms can be retooled for our pesticides. So my point is, the pests are already resistant. So let's say you killed off most of your pests and your beneficials, your pests are always going to rebound. There's always going to be a resurgence of pests. Sometimes in the same season, sometimes from season to season. We get a bit of a break over the winter. But when that happens, now that I've eliminated all of my beneficial insects too, not only is my primary pest a problem, now my secondary pest, an insect that was not a problem previously because it was being kept in check by those beneficial insects, that secondary pest can become an even greater problem because of my naive attempt to try to eradicate those insects. So my point here is that, we can use insecticides. They are one of the tools in our toolkit, but we should not over rely on them, and they should never be like our first resort or even our last resort. Use them in tandem with other pest control strategies, or you will get this. And so I mentioned, there are specific thresholds. So these are the thresholds for various pests on crucifers. I've chosen crucifers to share with you all, or brassicas, because this is like, one of our early season crops, and it gets a lot of pest pressures. A lot of things like to attack crucifers. So these are the thresholds for our heading type brassicas, your cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. On this next page are your thresholds for your leafy type brassicas, your collards, kale, mustard, and turnips. So yeah, this number of pests at this level, let's say for cabbage looper, 1 looper per 10 plants, that's when you start treating. And also these thresholds, they think of them as a moving target. Um, so like your plants can actually tolerate quite a bit of defoliation sometimes. When they're in the very early stage, just the cotyledon stage where they have the seed leaves, they're often pretty vulnerable to defoliation, like for flea beetles, and they have a low threshold here. But for example, things that produce fruit like tomatoes and peppers, once they go past this cotyledon stage and they're in the vegetative stage, making lots of leaves and nothing else, they're not making any flowers or fruit, they can tolerate up to a 30% reduction in leaf area before there is any effect on yield. Once they go to flower and start setting fruit, that threshold drops to 15%. And then once they go to forming fruit, mature fruit, the threshold again drops further to 10%. So I want you to think of these thresholds as a moving target. And I'm telling you this because even if you have seemingly lots of damage, you can often ignore it and save yourself the time and energy and money of applying pesticides. Our plants are often more resilient than we give them credit for. All right, one more concept before we get into the meat of today, which is the reservoir host. So it's really important to weed, getting rid of the weeds by the margins of your fields, or even in between the rows, because these weeds can sometimes serve as a reservoir of disease or pest to reinfest your planting. For example, with tomatoes, they are in the same family as these two common weeds, buffalo burr and common nightshade. They're all in the nightshade family, the Solanaceae. And because they are closely related, they can serve as hosts to some of the same pests and diseases, like tomato yellow leaf curl virus, tobacco spotted boll virus as well, or tomatoes, yeah, TSWV, tomato spotted boll virus, tomato leaf curl virus, a lot of different viruses host on all the members of this family. So let's say that I kill off all of the infected tomatoes from my planting, but I left these weeds that have the disease. Once I replant, they could then theoretically reinfest my planting through some kind of insect vector. So make sure that you're getting rid of those weeds, maybe by hand pulling them, by just nipping the flowers. You can even use like a little torch to just to burn them, a horticultural vinegar. There's a lot of weed management options that I'm not going to cover today. All right, and last slide before we get into like the pest ID, just some resources to have at your disposal. One, extension offices. So look up what your local extension office is. Even if they're not an entomologist like me and they're not, as bug smart as I am, because there are very few who know as much as I do, in bugs specifically, they are still going to be, have a background in entomology and they can help you with most like basic pest ID questions. Um, I also could not recommend more this application, iNaturalist. This is an app that lets you take a picture of an organism, whether it's a bug, a plant, a fungus, and then the app has an algorithm that'll identify the organism from your picture. And then it also has a network of people like me who are constantly checking the app to agree with or disagree with the app's recommendations because sometimes it's been wrong. And then lastly, if you're gonna like, if you maybe you can't get a good picture of something and you need to bring it in person, it'll help if you have like a hand lens or maybe just a really good phone camera, like iPhones have pretty good cameras to take really high quality, high resolution images. It's really hard for me to identify really small pests, especially like mites, from really blurry images. Um, if you can put this your insect and like or your sample, like maybe the plant tissue, in a jar or a baggie to bring to an extension office, make sure that you put a paper towel in there or something to absorb the moisture in with that plant tissue because if it gets too humid in there, mold can grow and that'll complicate the diagnosis. I won't know if it's the mold that caused the decline or something else that probably moved on once the plant fully died. And then also having a pocket knife because some of these insects kind of burrow into plant tissue. And so you want to be able to kind of like, to dig in and find the actual grub. Without further ado, we're going to get into our pests of today. And so I'm going to mention both abiotic and biotic disorders. So some of these are actually not caused by insects, they're caused by other things. And for each of these sections, like this one, I'm going to show you the picture and I want you all to tell me what you think it is. We're going to check how much you already know about some of these early season problems. So just put in the chat, what do you all think this caused this damage? Let's see if I can look at the chat now. Let's see, are people getting it? I just got it open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Everyone's saying hail,
Shell
hail.
and Steve just got it. Yep.
Yep, you're correct. This is hail damage. Oops. So, um, how do we deal with hail damage? Because I mean, we'll see with how dry the winter was. I hope we get some. I'm grateful for any form of precipitation, whether it's rain, hail, or snow. But it can really set back a lot of your plants. If you do get a lot of hail damage, you want to remove any severely damaged leaves and annuals. By severely damaged, I mean more than this. What I'm seeing in this picture of these peppers, this damage, I would actually leave the plant alone and let it recover on its own. So these leaves are a little like lightly damaged. I may trim this leaf back here, where they've kind of got these huge holes in them. And then I'll also apply like a balanced fertilizer. By balanced, I mean like the same number across the board, um, to give those plants the nutrients they need to fuel that, that regrowth. Um, and then also, I don't want to be a helicopter parent. A lot of people who get hail damage, they want to like walk back and forth over their garden multiple times, surveying the damage, but you can actually do more damage to the soil by being too present. Um, through soil compaction. Just by walking back and forth, soil is even more prone to compaction when it is wet from a hail event. So get in, apply your fertilizer, trim up your plants, um, and then get out. And one thing I forgot to mention, you want to remove any severely damaged leaves and annuals, because annuals, if they get really damaged, they may not be able to bounce back. But perennials are really hardly. Even if a perennial gets like shredded by the hail, I'll probably still leave it alone, and it will usually recover if given the proper, supportive care. Um, some other measures that you can do to protect from hail are to have some kind of like hail cloth. If you have raised beds, making one of these things. If you have a much larger planting, you can erect posts and put this shade cloth over. Um, and it can be much more DIY than this. I have just like sunk, I don't like I have a little concrete patio area and I sunk my posts in little barrels and then installed eye hooks in them so that I could just, hook the shade cloth on with carabiners. So you can go really high budget like this, or you can go really low budget like me. I think for like a 200 square foot area, cost me like maybe $100, maybe $200. All right, so I'm going to show you another example of leaf damage, and you got to tell me. Oh, never mind. I will in a second. Before I get into the next section, the rest of these are all going to be like living disorders. And so again, I'm going to show you the picture of the damage, and then you got to tell me which one of these did it. And a lot of these things are attacking our little baby plants, which is going to be a big problem here in a minute. So this one, let me know in the chat, what do you think caused this seedling to die? Someone said pill bugs, damping off, damping off. Who else? Who else? Slugs, dampening off, cutworms. All right, big reveal. This is damping off. And so someone asked what it is. I'm going to tell you about right now. So damping off is caused by a couple genera of fungi that cause necrosis or tissue death of seedlings specifically at or below soil level. Okay. So you can see this seedling, this one, this picture. Oops, back. You can see like with a cutworm, the cutworm is gonna like cut clean through. I'm gonna see chew marks basically. This one, the tissue more kind of like died, like because a fungus infected it. So there's more necrosis than chewing damage. And so you can see that again here in this picture. The seedlings kind of always keel over like a beaver chewed through them, but they're just kind of like, becoming squishy at the base and then keeling over. It's caused, being a fungus, by excessive moisture, by a lack of airflow, and weirdly, by low soil temperatures before germination or excessively high temperatures after germination. And so, how do we manage this disease? One, you're going to want to sterilize and clean all of your seedling flats. You can clean them with like soap and water, with like a weak bleach solution, or with like all-purpose alcohol, or sorry, rubbing alcohol or isopropyl, 70%. I don't recommend using all-purpose cleaners because those have been linked to a lot of cancers recently. Um, and then the problem of temperature, you're gonna want to put a heating pad before germination and then take it off right after germination because we don't want to create those high soil temperatures that'll lead to this disease. Um, you're gonna want to increase your airflow. So a lot of people want to like plant like way too many seedlings early on because they're gonna cull a lot of them. But if you make it too overcrowded, that can actually make a lot of them die towards dampening off. And then on the chemical control side, um, chamomile has been shown to have some pretty strong antimicrobial properties against this disease. So you can use like a chamomile tea brew or collect the flowers, dry them, and then crush them up and apply that flower powder to your seedlings. All right, now I'm going to get into the various insects that are going to plague us in this early season. And I want to talk about metamorphosis. This just describes how these insects, how their bodies change as they mature. Some insects undergo incomplete metamorphosis, which you're seeing here on the left, where the baby is just a smaller version of the adult. And then some insects undergo complete metamorphosis, like your butterflies, beetles, flies, etc., where the baby is a vastly different version of the adult. Um, and this life strategy, it's actually beneficial to these insects because mom and baby are so different, they're never fighting over the same food source. But it's more difficult for us because now we have to memorize what more than one body plan looks like. So I'll kind of reference if some of these bugs have incomplete or complete metamorphosis. To help you remember this, complete metamorphosis is kind of like Pokemon, where they evolve and they get much, much different as they get older. See this one, Charmander has no wings, Charizard has wings. Complete metamorphosis, like a butterfly, like a caterpillar going to a butterfly. And then incomplete metamorphosis, it's like if your baby had a beard just like you, but was just tinier. All right, so I have another picture of some damage to a seedling. What caused this? Which of those pests is this one? No one wants to give it a stab? Okay, rodent, grasshopper. Someone said cutworm. Anybody else? Another one for cutworm. I should have made this a Mentimeter poll. Rabbit. So with the rodents, something with chompers. Yep, that's not wrong. Um, the rodents would kind of like, I think they would just eat the whole thing. I don't think they would leave the stems intact. So for this one, I will spoil it for you all now. That was cutworms. And again, they cut clean through. You can see how this stem has a very clean cut, almost like something with scissors. Um, they are called cutworms because they will curl their body around the stems of plant and they kind of wrap around tightly and then cut through the stem because they feed on the phloem, on the sap, not even on the tissue of the plant either, which kind of is frustrating because it's like, if you're gonna eat my plant, at least like eat it and like don't waste any food. But that's besides the point. They're also known as army worms because when you have a really high population of them and not a lot of food, they'll begin marching like head to butt like an army, almost like lemmings. Um, Cutworms are also the larval stage of the miller moth, so we have another reason to hate them now. And I think that we'll have higher levels of miller moth this year because of how mild the winter was. That mild winter was not killing off any of these cutworms. They are actually active throughout the winter, and they emerge as temperatures permit to feed on various plants. They have a pretty wide host range. And you often find them beneath like large objects in contact with the soil, like logs and large rocks. Now, to manage cutworms, oops, you can simply create some kind of physical barrier around your plant. They have to be able to wrap their body around to chew through it. So, putting these nails around the stem of this plant, or even if your seedlings are small enough to fit them through one of these toilet paper rolls, that'll keep the cutworms away, and probably some other seedling pests too, like earwigs and crickets. Oops. And one more thing before I move on to other pests. Being moth larva, there is an organic, it's more of a biological pesticide called thuricide. This is a bacteria that works against basically any butterfly or moth larva, and it spreads between them like a disease. So thuricide can work for cutworms. It can also work for cabbage whites, for cabbage loopers, for any caterpillar or moth larva. All right, so crickets, I didn't quiz you because the damage that crickets inflict can kind of look almost identical to cutworm damage. Um, there are three types of crickets that you may encounter damaging your seedlings. The mole cricket, going from left to right, the mole cricket, the really creepy looking camel crickets, and also field crickets. And so if you ever see like your seedlings cut down, it could be crickets, it could be the cutworms. If you see a little hole really close to the plants that got damaged, then it's definitely mole crickets. These guys over here. They have these two specialized front legs specifically for digging burrows. And fun fact about them is that they dig the burrow. One is like a place to live, but also to amplify their sound. Instead of rubbing their wings together to make sound, a lot of these guys rub their wings or their bodies against the base of their burrow and they make it in a specific shape that'll amplify the sound of their call. But mole crickets are pretty rare. I see more damage from camel and field crickets. And I also want to talk about earwigs because earwigs, they leave damage similar to the crickets, and their management is like very, very similar. One, you're going to want to create some kind of physical barrier. Just like with the crickets, you can use glue boards to manage them or sticky traps. Did I mention that? Um, and for the glue boards, you can buy them at a store. You can also make your own simply by getting a piece of duct tape with the sticky side up and placing a single piece of cat food at the center. The earwigs, the crickets will come attracted to eat the cat food, but after the first bug gets caught, that piece of cat food becomes superfluous because the rest of the bugs will now be attracted to come eat their recently deceased friend. Um, with earwigs, they also like a lot of large objects in contact with the soil. They like really dark, cramped spaces where they can hide out. So get rid of any like, just get these things off the ground. Maybe elevate them onto a workbench or yeah, just some kind of bench with fewer contact points with the soil. So large rocks, large logs, and then also avoid like the larger particled mulches like pine bark. Those create much more of those dark, cramped spaces for earwigs to inhabit. Now, earwigs do get kind of a bad rap. I mean, they are seedling pests, but there's a lot of fear about them because people think that they crawl into your ear and hook in, hence the name earwig. And it was thought that they use these little hooks on their butt to do that. They're not used for crawling into your ear at all. Those hooks are actually used for fighting with other males or for catching prey. So you're seeing in this video two males that are kind of sizing each other up and then going to kind of like wrestle with these little hooks. Um, these fights are almost never fatal. Usually one guy gets tired of being pinched and then kind of gives up and goes away. Um, and one more fun fact is that it's the males with the most asymmetric hooks that always win these fights for some reason. It gives them some kind of tactical advantage. All right, and now for rodent
Green.
management. Is there a question? Sorry.
Yeah, there's a question in
No.
the chat. What mulch do you recommend between garden rows for earwigs?
I would just use like wood chips, like from a chip drop. Um, yeah, like just anything besides pine bark. Pine bark is the one I just want you to avoid for earwigs. Yeah, like the wood chips that you get from like chip drop, they're small enough that they don't provide those little hiding spots for the earwigs. All right, and now for rodent management. So they can be pests for many reasons. One, they will actually like dig up and eat seeds, especially like larger seeds, like for cucurbits, like members of the gourd family, sunflower seeds, corn seeds. And so if they're digging up and eating your seeds, you can often like put down some kind of like wire or mesh to just keep them from being able to physically get at the seeds until they germinate. Once they germinate, they become much less palatable to these little guys. Um, if you have like a birdseed dispenser somewhere, maybe get that away from your crops or just get rid of it entirely. There's a lot of debate about like whether birdseed is really good for birds. It often, you're often feeding a lot of the non-native birds like starlings, and a lot of our native birds much rather prefer to get their seeds from like native plants. Like the goldfinches go crazy for the flowers, the seed heads of coneflower, of black-eyed Susans. They do need a lot of these seeds through the winter when those other sources are not available, like, providing suet over the winter. But yeah, I would just avoid birdseed during the growing season. And then rodents can also be a problem because they will chew through irrigation lines, not necessarily to get at the water. They just do it because they want to. I don't think they actually have a reason to do it. It's one of those weird urban phenomena. And so to manage rodents, yeah, one, avoid direct sowing. Try to get your seedlings started indoors so that they germinate before they go outside and by that point they are less palatable to these rodents. You can use some kind of physical barrier to keep the rodents from digging up the seedlings, like hardware cloth or chicken wire. Um, and then there's also repellent options, peppermint oil, a DIY solution of like cayenne pepper and garlic or blood meal will all repel rodents. You can actually dip cotton balls in these chemicals and put them near your vulnerable seedlings, and that smell will repel them. And probably it'll also repel some of the other pests that I mentioned. Insects in general don't like the smell of peppermint oil. I don't recommend using like crushed up eggshells. People think that crushing up eggshells creates this little like physical barrier where the rodents don't like crawling on it. It pokes their feet. Not true. They have no problem getting through eggshells. The same applies to slugs. People think they can crush up eggshells and apply a moat of it around their vulnerable plants. Slugs also glide right over it. Yeah, and then blood meal, they also don't like the smell of that. If you're going to create your own DIY solution, make sure that you are consulting some kind of really credible recipe. Again, maybe take it from a .edu page, not a .com. Because if you make it too dilute, it won't achieve the intended control. If you make it too concentrated, then it may actually damage your seedlings. And then the last two, glue boards and rodent base stations, I have some words about. Glue boards definitely they will kill rodents. A lot of people don't consider them very humane because of the way they kill the rodent. It just kind of gets cut, stuck, and then eventually dies from exhaustion, which is a very slow death. So, just keep that in mind. And then rodent base stations as well. I don't think that it affects your organic certification to have like some of these synthetic insecticides for the rodent management. Um, but also like the way that it kills the rodents, they often die of like really violent convulsions. So just keep that in mind. All right. We've got another picture of insect damage. Who done it? What causes kind of damage? And I will talk about diatomaceous earth in a minute too. Everyone's saying flea beetles, flea beetles. Are you sure? Are you sure it's flea beetles? Okay, you're right. It is flea beetles. I was trying to trick you guys. So flea beetles leave what we call buckshot damage. It's almost like someone sprayed like shot with a shotgun at this leaf, where there's a bunch of really tiny little holes all over the place. They don't defoliate entire leaves like a grasshopper or a caterpillar might do. So flea beetles in general are very small, usually about a 16th to an eighth of an inch. They usually are very like iridescent, meaning they kind of shine as they move in the light. Um, some common species that you'll see are the most common, the biggest problem for us is the crucifer flea beetle, this one in the top left. Um, but there's also flea beetles of a lot of like native plants, like on sumac. There's one that attacks willow. This one, the three-spotted flea beetle, attacks willow trees. This one on the bottom is the leafy spurge flea beetle. It was actually intentionally introduced to help manage leafy spurge, an invasive plant here in Colorado. Flea beetles are pretty host specific. So the crucifer flea beetle is not going to attack leafy spurge or willows or sumac. It's only going to attack crucifers. And the other guys, if you see them, you don't need to worry because they are only going to attack their respective hosts. Um, and these insects, the larvae, I put the feed on the roots twice here. So the larvae feed on roots. The damage the larvae do is pretty insignificant, with the exception of one species, the penstemon flea beetle larva, which only goes after penstemon. So not really relevant to like, growers. But just know if you find larvae in the soil, they're not doing a lot of damage. It's really the adults. And it's really the adults in the early season because they will defoliate young plants, especially ones in the cotyledon stage when they're just making those seed leaves. And if they lose those cotyledons, they don't have the energy or the resources to help and regrow, and they will often just die and keel over. So we want to focus a lot on protecting our young seedlings from defoliation by flea beetles. So to detect them, one, you all know what the damage looks like. Um, you can also, besides just like waiting for your plants to be damaged, you can do sweep netting. You can go through your crops with a butterfly net and simply kind of, bat the plants with the net and see if you're catching any of these beetles so that you can notice them before you have a full-scale infestation and you're seeing this damage all over your plants. Um, Going back to like the thresholds, the thresholds for a lot of brassicas tend to be very low compared to tomatoes. They often have very high thresholds because I'm not eating the tomato leaves, I'm eating the fruit, and they can still produce lots of fruit despite all that leaf damage. Whereas when I get a single chew hole in my brassicas, my collards, after a single bite has been taken, I have already lost some of my yield because I am eating the leaves, not the fruit. So these beetles are directly stealing from my yield with each chew hole, hence the lower thresholds for crucifers. Flea beetles can also vector diseases sometimes. It's not super common, but it does happen. Specifically of this of corn bacterial wilt, vectored by the corn flea beetle. Again, a very host-specific pest. And it's called bacterial wilt because the bacteria colonize the water vessels of the plant, the xylem. And so the plant looks drought stressed because it kind of is, because it can't get water where it needs to go, because the bacteria are literally blocking the water vessels. But the difference, though, is that if you provide water to the plant, it still will not recover because the problem is not the lack of water. The problem is the water can't get where it needs to go. So that's one disease that is kind of like only vectored by them. And then there are other diseases that can be facultatively vectored, meaning these diseases, they can be vectored through other routes, but the flea beetles can act as one of those transmission routes. And now for, some of the more direct management of flea beetles, starting with the preventative measures first. Usually, the damage is inconsequential in established plants, in mature plants. And also, the flea beetles, as it gets hotter later in the season, they typically go more dormant. And we'll see how this really hot spring will affect them. Maybe they'll be less of a problem. Fingers crossed. Um, but in young plants, they are really vulnerable. So, what we want to do is encourage really vigorous plant growth. Make sure that your plants are properly mulched, properly fertilized, properly watered, so that they can resist the pests of their own accord. and or so that they can, regrow to recover any damage that they experience from these beetles. And then lastly, you want to use trap crops. So a trap crop is a plant that is especially attractive to these pests. They will actually preferentially go to these trap crops over your other crops. Um, it does matter though with trap crops, the timing, the placement, and the watering. And by the way, there's trap crops for multiple pests. For flea beetles, the most attractive crop for them is daikon radish. Now I'm gonna want to plant that daikon radish 2 weeks before I plant my other plants, so that this radish can get nice and established and big, and so that it can have more of that pull effect on the pests. If I plant it at the same time as my other plants, it's not going to be as attractive to these pests. And then when I mentioned consider timing and watering, you don't ever want to let your trap crop dry out or, God forbid, mow it, because that'll cause an exodus of whatever pests have been consolidated onto it. Those pests will emigrate onto your other cash crops. Um, and then lastly, placement. This is less important with flea beetles. Like if there's a nearby natural area, try to put your trap crop between your cash crop and the natural area. 'Cause that's often where the pests are coming from. Like with grasshoppers, they often overwinter on the outside of the property in the dry, undisturbed soil at the margins of fields. But flea beetles tend to overwinter in the soil at the base of the plants that they were feeding on. So the placement is less important for them. It's more important for other pests. Another measure to control flea beetles, a bit more reactive now because we're actually going to be buying and spraying something, is kaolin clay. And kaolin clay, it kind of walks the line between being a physical control and a chemical control. This is not an insecticide. It doesn't really kill insects on contact at all, or even it doesn't affect them when it touches them at all. But how it helps deter feeding is it forms this really fine, almost microscopic film on the surface of the leaf, and it creates a physical barrier against the feeding of really small insects. Now, emphasis on the word small. Things like flea beetles and smaller. So it'll also help against thrips, aphid, whitefly, mealybug, and scale. It will not deter grasshoppers or beetles or moth larvae. The other downside is that this chemical, it has to be reapplied after each rain or irrigation event because that will wash the kaolin clay off the leaves. And before you ask, it does not significantly affect the physical properties of the soil. It's not going to make your soil more clayey. Um, and now for the physical controls for flea beetles. You can use row covers or screens. Just make sure that whatever your screen you're using, the gaps between the screens are smaller than the flea beetles because flea beetles are also very small and they can sneak through small enough gaps. Um, really a thick layer of, not thick mulches, but a thick layer of mulch over the surface of the soil will prevent the flea beetle larva from being able to emerge. About 2 to 3 inches of mulch will keep those flea beetles from emerging. There are also things called reflective mulches, these long sheets of like a really shiny material. I forget the name of it. But these reflective mulches interfere with flea beetle navigation. When they're flying and they see the light reflected at them, it deters them from wanting to land there. And these reflective mulches also work against other pests, like, again, small flying things, thrips, whitefly, fungus gnats, mealybugs, etc. These reflective mulches also, if you handle them very delicately, they can sometimes be reused from season to season. And then lastly, sweep netting, like this guy is doing in this picture. Just this is one a monitoring method and also a control method. Or you can like vacuum things up. There's like special bug vacuums, really small ones to help kind of collect the beetles. It's kind of hard though because they're called flea beetles because they have these big muscular hind legs, which you can kind of see in some of these pictures, and they jump readily when disturbed. So you got to really kind of like sneak up on them. All right, and now for the chemical controls for flea beetles. It's hard to use insecticides to manage them because, similar to Japanese beetle, flea beetles are very prevalent, meaning they're kind of like everywhere, and they're very mobile. They can fly pretty far. Any chemical that you would apply would need to have a long residual activity so that it can stick around long enough to keep these beetles from coming back or killing them when they come back. And so a lot of the chemicals that are recommended for flea beetles are not organic. Like in the next slide, I'll show you like pyrethrins, pyrethroids are recommended for flea beetles, but you cannot use them with an organic certification. What you can use is the kaolin clay that I mentioned. Um, you can use this white powder that I'm showing you here on the right. It's called diatomaceous earth. So this is a it's made from fossilized organisms called diatoms that make their bodies out of basically silicon dioxide, silica gel. And so this white powder, the way that it kills the insects is you apply it around the base of the plants. When the bugs walk across it, these microscopic crystals will pierce their exoskeleton, and this insect will then die several hours later from desiccation, from basically losing all of its body fluids through the piercing wound that it got from these crystals. Now, this is a white powder that you need to apply around the base of plants. It's really dry, so whenever it gets wet, like from irrigation or rain, it'll need to be reapplied. It's not effective once it gets wet. You also want to apply it somewhere where it's not super windy. It can get blown away pretty easily. And it is relatively non-toxic. It is kind of like food grade, but still, you should wear protective PPE when you're applying it. Wear gloves, a mask maybe, because if it's really windy or the dust gets disturbed as you're handling the bag, you don't want to inhale that dust. It's not good for you. We also don't want like any pets or even like sometimes kids eat whatever. You don't want to eat it either. Although I did have a woman in the talk that I gave recently who told me she was eating it to deworm herself. Um, Someone asked, does the diatomaceous earth negatively affect pollinators if misapplied? So I guess if you misapply it badly enough, like if you apply it to the flowers, it can affect the pollinators, but we're always applying this chemical to the soil, not where pollinators are going to be frequenting. And then there's one more chemical that I want to mention called spinosad. Spinosad is derived from like soil bacterium. I forget the names of the bacteria, but basically it is fully organic. You can use spinosad with an organic certification. Um, and with seedlings, they're very vulnerable for that entire seedling stage, so we often need more than one application of whichever chemical we're going to use or not chemical, whichever material, because a lot of these, the kaolin clay and the diatomaceous earth are actually more of like, you know, um, they're basically earth. So here are some other insecticides that are mentioned, like on CSU's fact sheet for flea beetles. Just know that like most of these, the cypermethrin, pyrethrin, cyhalothrin, and acetaminoprid are all not organic. Do not use these for your operations. Um, Fun fact, pyrethroids are a specific class of insecticides, and you'll know that a chemical is a pyrethroid because it'll end in this suffix, thrin, permethrin, cyhalothrin, cypermethrin. Um, but yeah, not really safe to be around. All right, we've got another picture of damage. Does anyone know what caused this one? And hint, a lot of these pests are very host specific, so if you know what the host plant is or what family it is in, that is half the work of identification. Nobody? No one's brave enough? Okay. Someone said cucumber beetle, squash beetle, more cucumber beetle, squash bug. So this is actually, I'm just gonna say beetles because I stumble over the word cucumber, but this is cucumber beetle. Um, and I know that it's cucumber beetle and not squash, but I'll talk about squash bug. But the difference is that cucumber beetles have chewing mouth parts. They're going to leave chew holes, whereas squash bugs are more closely related to aphids. They do get called squash beetles too sometimes, but they're not really beetles. And they have being closely related to aphids, they have a straw for a mouth. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So they don't leave holes in the leaves. They leave more of like puncture wounds or discoloration. So there are two types of these beetles, the spotted one and the striped one. And the spotted one is generally not as much of a problem for two reasons. Well, the main reason is that this guy, the larva, don't feed on cucurbits. They feed on grasses, a lot of native grass species on their roots. Whereas the striped one, it feeds on the cucumber at the larval stage and the adult stage. The other reason that the striped one is more problematic is because these beetles can vector bacterial wilt, similar to the wilt that I showed you with the flea beetles on corn. Um, and it's more so the striped beetle that vectors the wilt, not so much the spotted beetle. These beetles are kind of small, about a fifth of an inch, but still bigger than flea beetles. They typically emerge in the late summer around the same time as Japanese beetles, and they have multiple generations per year. Um, Younger plants tend to be more vulnerable, and they don't really have many alternative hosts because there's not a lot of wild weeds in the cucurbit family here in Colorado. There's just one, which is called bittermelon. Um, and also the cucurbit family has really it's really easy to identify. I mean, they all have those big, seven pointed leaves just on a smaller scale than a cucumber. So, I'm gonna I talked about the word cotyledon before. The cotyledons are these two leaves here, the leaves that are encased in the seed before the plants germinate. And so not only are these young plants more vulnerable, a lot of the thresholds, the economic thresholds that are out there for these beetles refer to the cotyledons. They will say, you know, X number of beetles per cotyledon. So it's really important to be able to distinguish between the cotyledons, these seed leaves, and the true leaves, this leaf, the ones that are produced after they germinate. So the first step towards management is proper detection. Um, we want to look, for damage, not just like damage to the mature plants. If you notice seedlings that are keeling over, dig them up and look for the larvae of these beetles amongst the roots. That's where, maybe a pocket knife may come in handy for prying into some of this tissue, or just, if you grow out your fingernails. Um, the damage is, just chew holes in plants. It can almost look a little bit like Japanese beetle damage, where you get this skeletonizing, where these like sections of leaves that they eat kind of coalesce and the tissue starts to die off. Um, when you have really high levels of these pests, they typically attack the leaves, but under those conditions, you may have damage to flowers, to the fruit, and also to the stems. The damage to the stems, it does affect them. It does kind of hurt the plant, but it's not, affecting yield so much as the damage to the leaves. But the damage to the fruit and the flowers is completely inconsequential. You can ignore damage to the fruit and the flowers. Damage to the flowers will not affect yield. They will still produce the same poundage of fruit. And damage to the fruit itself is aesthetic. That fruit is still, the inside is totally intact. That may affect the marketability if you have consumers that are a bit more, prima donnas, maybe a bit more ignorant. Maybe just educate them. Even if this was damaged by this insect, um, it's still going to taste the same. And the fact that you see this damage means that you know that I am not using as many toxic chemicals. Now again, it's the striped beetle that is more problematic that'll often defoliate those young plants. So make sure that you're monitoring them weekly, especially when they are in that cotyledon, that seedling stage. Um, Now, there's a big variability in the cucurbit family about their tolerance to these beetles. Pumpkin and winter squash can tolerate really high levels of damage after that third true leaf stage, after they have produced three of these true leaves. So when I say third true leaf stage, I don't mean here. I don't count the cotyledons. I don't say one, two, three. I need to have basically five total leaves, two cotyledons plus the three true leaves. Now, these beetles, mainly the striped one, can vector bacterial wilt, so a disease that basically blocks up the water vessels of these plants. And so the symptoms look a lot like drought stress. Um, Again, just like with there's a variability in the tolerance of the different plants to flea beetles, there's also a variability in the tolerance of the plants to the disease. Cantaloupe and cucumber are the most vulnerable to bacterial wilt. Squash and pumpkin are moderately vulnerable, and watermelon is essentially resistant, meaning that it doesn't mean it's immune. It just means that it gets, it will show symptoms at similar levels of disease in squash and pumpkin and melon and cucumber. Now, for detection, I know I'm at 6 o'clock, so I'm going to try to go a little bit faster here. To detect this disease, if you see your plants are in drought stress and they're not getting recovering after getting water, you can cut the stems long way and look for discoloration along the interior of the stem, or you can cut them more horizontally Um, and then touch those cut stems together and then slowly pull them apart. If you notice sap kind of stringing out as you pull it apart, that is a positive confirmation of the disease. That sap stringing out is actually the bacterial ooze, the basically a bunch of sugars that are produced by the bacteria to create a better environment for them to live in inside those water vessels. For cultural controls of these beetles, you're going to want to remove any plant debris that's going to be where they're hiding. This also applies to squash bugs and flea beetles. You're going to want to implement crop rotation by planting things not in the cucurbit family just for 1 year. These beetle, the larvae, will often die after a single year without any food, or they'll go somewhere else. There are also trap crops for these beetles, specifically blue Hubbard or buttercup squash and zucchini are particularly attractive to these cucumber beetles. Just make sure that you plant them 2 weeks prior to the main crop so they can get nice and big and have more of that pull effect on these pests. So squash bugs, like I mentioned, a lot of the same strategies that work on these beetles also work on squash bugs. It's also important just to do proper detection, to be checking your plants to see if you can find the egg masses and squish them, the babies, and the adults. Um, Diatomaceous earth is also really effective for managing squash bugs because they like to hide, at the bottom of the plant where it's nice and protected. Putting a ring of that white powder around the base of the plants will cause a lot of these bugs to desiccate and die because we don't really have any insecticides to manage them, and there's not really any biocontrols for them either. We're kind of stuck with detection, removing those crop residues to get rid of the hiding spots, and the diatomaceous earth. Now, some more physical controls for these beetles. You can use row covers or screens. Just make sure, like with the flea beetles, that these screens are small enough that the beetles can't get through. Um, and then you can do a little bit of tillage of the soil in like late spring or spring or late fall to expose those larvae that are overwintering to the winter cold so that they will, basically dry out and die over the winter. Or if you till in the spring, to expose them to hopefully, if we get one, a spring frost. We'll see. Now, if you are going to use insecticides, application timing is very important. Um, Squash has its own specialized pollinator called a squash bee, but all members of the squash family are loved by this bee. Um, these bees are really morning people. They are typically active like before noon, and then they kind of go to sleep after noon. Similar to the squash flowers. Squash flowers also have their peak nectar flow before noon, and they typically close or fall off by noon. So if you're going to apply insecticides, apply it before they are active, before 8 a.m., or after they've definitely gone to sleep and all of the other pollinators have also gone to sleep after 6 p.m. You can see in this picture on the bottom, this flower has both a squash bee and two of those spotted beetles, but these ones are less problematic than this striped one. Now for just to mention grasshoppers, because they're going to be a big problem this year. This is one of those pests that is exacerbated by having a really dry and mild winter. They are also more problematic in cities because they like really dry, hot conditions, and the urban heat island effect from all that pavement makes it basically a better environment for the grasshoppers. And also there's fewer predators in the city too. And they also have outbreak years where they're not a problem 1 year and then they're a major problem the next year. And last year wasn't so bad, so I think this year may be a really, really bad year. So be ready for that. Grasshoppers lay their eggs in dry, undisturbed soil, usually like 1 to 2 inches deep. This is kind of an anomaly. This grasshopper here, they're going about like 3 to 4 inches deep. So if you can till in the late fall to expose those eggs to the winter cold. You only need to till to like 1 to 2 inches. Um, Grasshopper eggs will start hatching out when we get temperatures above 55 consistently for 4 to 5 days. Um, so they're going to start hatching out pretty soon. A lot of you have probably already noticed some grasshopper activity. Those are not the ones that are hatching out. That is the speckled winged rangeland grasshopper, and that species with like the red wings or with the pale kind of tannish in their wings, those ones overwinter as adults. So while they are going to emerge earlier this year, I haven't seen them emerging yet. And, a late frost in the spring really hurts the garden but it does significantly curb populations of these grasshoppers, those little nymphs that are hatching out. We often need those frosts to help manage the populations. Now, these guys also have favorite plants that I listed here below. They like things with really fleshy green leaves, tender leaves, like lettuce, corn, beans, zinnias. So you can use these plants as your trap crops. Just again, make sure that they don't dry out, that you don't mow them, that you plant them early, and then you plant them between your cash crop and where the grasshoppers are seemingly coming from. So I mentioned trap cropping, I mentioned tillage. Mulching the soil can help keep them down. They like really dry, undisturbed soil with no mulch, so like bare dirt. Um, it's also these nymphs, these babies, that are the most vulnerable to insecticides and to biological controls. So I know they look very cute. Oh, they're really cute. Just kill them when they're this stage. Kill the babies. With nematodes, with fungi like white muscadine disease, green muscadine disease. There are some nematodes and fungi that are specific to grasshoppers, but they have not been sold for I think over 8 years now because there was a facility in Durango that was manufacturing them and it burnt down in 2018 and it hasn't resumed operation since then because of some USDA red tape. Um, so all we have now are the more generalist biocontrols. And you can use netting to prevent grasshoppers from getting to your plants. Just know that when you have a lot of grasshoppers and not a lot of food, they have been known to chew through plastic netting. So in that case, you may have to resort to metal netting, crazily enough. All right. I'm going to kind of skip some of these slides now because I'm over time. Just know that cover cropping is a really just general way to help manage a lot of different pests and support the soil microbiome. Just know if you're going to do cover crops, I would avoid legumes and clovers because they are very water intensive. Um, and if you're going to use grasses, just make sure that you get rid of them before they go to seed. Um, there's also a practice known as biofumigation, um, which is kind of you can combine this with trap cropping. Some people will plant certain brassicas as a cover crop, and then at the end of the season, once the grasshoppers are, sorry, not the grasshoppers, once the brassicas are flowering, they will chop and drop those plants into the garden. And that's because these certain brassicas are really high in a chemical called a glucosinolate, and those chemicals can have antimicrobial and anti-pest, insect properties. They'll kill a lot of the dormant stages of insects that are residing in the soil, as well as many like pathogens like Phytophthora and Fusarium. Um, it's just really critical though to chop and drop them when they are at peak flowering because that's when the plant has the peak glucosinolate content. You can still chop and drop them when they are, when they're just in the leaf stage or when they're going to seed, but you'll get much less of these antimicrobial chemicals. Oops. And this table shows you specifically which brassicas have that higher glucosinolate content. So, use this to inform what you'll use as your cover crop slash biofumigant. And then lastly, I'll be done here in like 2 minutes. There's a practice called conservation biocontrol. So biocontrol in the conventional sense refers to releasing some kind of parasitic wasp that you buy somewhere and it's captively bred in the lab to manage pests. Conservation biocontrol, does not require you to buy anything. You are simply modifying the landscape to attract the already existing populations of these beneficial organisms. And a lot of you are probably already doing this. Just planting flowers attracts lots of good predatory wasps and predatory beetles, parasitic wasps. Hedgerows, bunch grasses, and thatch act as like a miscellaneous habitat for a bunch of cool organisms, like your predatory beetles, like your spiders. A lot of parasitic wasps will store the bugs that they have caught in the crevices of these grasses and hedgerows. Um, Include plants that have hollow pithy stems. A lot of our native bees nest in the cavities that they chew or they excavate in these stems, such as those that form on sunflowers. Umbellifers is the carrot family, so carrots, dill, fennel, parsley, cilantro, celery. Joe Pyeweed is one. It's probably not really common here because it is more water intensive, but showy milkweed has the overwinter in there. Asters as well. Just wait until spring to cut back because these bugs are overwintering in the stems, and if you cut them back in the fall or too early in the spring, they may warm up too fast and emerge from dormancy too soon and burn through some of their fat stores before adequate forage like flowers become available. Some other practices that you can do are to, if you have like a dead tree and it's not a fall risk or a pest reservoir, like for ash trees, we got to get rid of those because of emerald ash borer. But if it's not a reservoir of disease or a liability, leave it be. Or if it is a fall risk, maybe just cut it down and leave the logs on site because they will serve as host to a whole new set of organisms different than what it hosted while it was alive. Um, these brush piles and the rock walls are also places where a lot of predatory, like spiders and beetles, will hang out, and also where the parasitic wasps will store their catch. And then undisturbed patches of bare soil are where 70% of our 1,100 native species of bees will nest. Now, when I say brush piles or rock walls, it doesn't have to be some big ugly pile of like rocks or brush that you hide behind your shed at the corner of your property like a love child. It can be both aesthetic and functionally in your garden. Just if you're going to use like brush or like twigs as edging, beware of the fire risk. I wouldn't have this going all the way up to like a wooden structure. And I talked a lot about native bees. Here's an example of one of these native bees, a leafcutter bee, nesting inside one of these little bee hotels. You can make your own for really easily too, just by getting a drill and like drilling various sized holes into logs. Um, if you're gonna do bee hotels though, there is some like yearly or bi-yearly maintenance to make sure that there are not levels of parasites building up in these domiciles. Oops. And then I swear I only have two more slides. Um, I also want to talk about beetle banks. When I say beetle banks, people often think of like this, but that's actually, yeah, I just made this in MS Paint for fun. Um, this is a beetle bank. So a beetle bank is a mounded furrow of soil that is planted densely with grasses, and it creates habitat for predatory beetles like ground beetles and rove beetles, and for spiders like ground spiders and wolf spiders. You mound the soil so that it has good drainage, so that in the winter, water does not collect there and cause those beetles and spiders to freeze to death. And I also have a little link here from the Xerces Society that has specific instructions on like how to create this beetle bank, how wide, how tall it should be. So I encourage you to refer to that fact sheet. All right, and we're gonna finish off just by going back to Mentimeter and answering some questions to see like how useful was this talk to you all? How useful can we make future talks? And I'll also take questions at this time.
Yeah,
So
and Kareem, maybe so the data like that will just be mostly used for us. This is almost like the survey. So we could take questions now and people could just do the Mentimeter on their own and you can just keep clicking through every once in a while to just keep it going.
sounds
So
good.
we have some time. But I just want to really thank you, Kareem. Not only I have a question, but not only did I learn a lot and took a bunch of notes, I was also laughing the whole time. So I had a great time. But I have some questions. First one is from Samantha. Is removing the damaged leaves from cucumber and squash beetles, or removing the damaged leaves from cucumbers and squash helpful, or can the damaged leaves stay on the plants?
Yeah, if it's like more than 40% of the leaf has been damaged, then it would cut it off. If it's less than that, leave it be or just cut off the really, really damaged sections. And I'll try to find an image to share with you all of like what 40% damage looks like. I'll send that in my follow-up email with Jess.
Hmm.
Um, I have the chat open too. I see that someone asked, do you know what insect sucks or chews on flower buds like dahlias that deform the flowers? So yes, it is probably aphids, I think. When you have a lot of aphids or any kind of insect with piercing, sucking mouth parts feeding on developing buds, that'll cause fasciation or distortion of those tissues. So look more closely. Some of the aphids can be really small, but they may be kind of hiding in little crevices of the flower. Any
And
other questions, Jess, that I missed?
Steve said you did not discuss ladybugs as biocontrols.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So, I am against buying ladybugs for three reasons. One, and the most important, they are not captively bred. The parasitic wasps and other like lacewing larvae are captively bred in the lab. Ladybugs are poached from the wild. They have communal overwintering sites, kind of like monarchs, People just go and scoop them into jars and ship them to you. A lot of them die in transit. They get a disease called Hesperomyces that gets vectored along with the ladybug trade. So, one, they're poached. Two, ladybugs eat the most aphids in their larval stage, and you buy them as adults. So they're kind of past their prime. And when you buy them as adults, they have wings and often just fly away. So if you're gonna do it, which again I don't encourage, you would need to do it only in like a hoop house, high tunnel, or an enclosed environment, not into your outdoor environment.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to add it in the chat. I did see someone early on mention that they were having some aphids problems in the greenhouse. Do you have any suggestions for that? I mean, I know we didn't cover aphids today, but some things to help.
Yeah. So my favorite thing is biological controls like parasitic wasps. It can be harder because when you're growing a lot of your crops, like in the early season, it's too cold for a lot of these parasitic wasps to be effective. Um, so besides that, you know, try to pick insecticides that have leaf penetrating activity. Organic things like peppermint oil and rosemary oil will penetrate the leaves and get to the aphids hiding in those crevices. Besides that, you can also use yellow sticky cards. Small flying insects like fungus gnats, aphids, whitefly are all attracted to that yellow color, so they'll fly into there, and it'll also serve as like a double method of like also monitoring for them. The last thing that I'll add is like if you are going to use parasitic wasps, certain parasitic wasps prefer smaller aphid species. Some prefer larger aphid species. For example, Aphidius irvi prefers the larger species like the potato aphid. Aphidius abdominalis prefers the smaller species like the oleander aphid, the bean aphid, most of the other smaller species. So I will send Jess, like, I'll include in my little follow-up email this aphid mummy species and like the species of aphid that it is better suited to control.
That's great. And can you get that from the Palisade insectary, the parasitic wasp?
No, the Palisade Insectary mostly sells like weed biocontrols and one wasp to manage this moth on peaches. These, I will send just a link of like suppliers of these other beneficial insects. They're kind of like all over the place in California, in Arizona, Texas, and there's like one in Colorado. Yeah, write it down.
Um, well, I'm just, oh, we got another one. Oh, yeah, Heather said thank you so much
So
for
thank you.
sharing your knowledge. I could listen to you discuss pests for several hours too. Uh,
Thank you.
but I did have a question about, okay, so I really like the idea of the trap crops. Do you have um like a document or like a fact sheet that has like all the different trap crops for different plants? Like I feel like that would be really helpful to know what trap crops to plant based on what bug you're having problems with and what plants are those bugs are on.
I do not have one, but I will make one for you guys because I'll use it in other